economist by background, social researcher at the same time, sometimes in the past when the dinosaurs were still existing, and keen to follow the cohesion process. I was, as a social researcher, I was very much studying the reports on cohesion, because the big question is how effective the cohesion process has been. And I have the great pleasure of discussing about the social dimension here, not only because I'm chairing in the Parliament the committee that deals with that, but I think that this dimension is really important, and it's important obviously from the point of view that we have a commitment here that is very much underlined in the European Pillar of Social Rights and in the action plan that we've recently adopted. Also in the Recovery and Resilience Facility, we have a strong social dimension. And I think that it's very, very important to have this social dimension of the cohesion, because also as a member of the Parliament, I think that everything should be about the citizens, about the people. And we can't just go on discussing theoretical stuff without, catering the needs of the people. But it's also the economic dimension of that. We need people to be part of the society, to be active in society, to have an independent life, and to be able to participate. And for that, we need, a skilled labor force. We need people that will be able to contribute to the progress that we are having here. So with this being said, and without further ado, let me say that I'm thrilled to be accompanied here by three wonderful speakers. And I will start by introducing the first speaker. Markus Bayer has been Director General of Business Europe since late 2012. Prior to this, he held the position of CEO of the Austrian Industry Holding, OIAG, Director General of the Federation of Austrian Industries, and Director for Economic Affairs of the Austrian Federal Economics Chamber. Before this, Mr. Bayer served as Chief Economic Advisor to the Federal Chancellor of the Republic of Austria, Dr. Wolfgang Schlussel. Mr. Bayer read law and commercial sciences in Vienna, graduating in law at the University of Vienna. Later, he completed postgrad studies in European law at the Danube University in Krems, Austria, and the Stanford Executive Program at the Graduate School of Business and Stanford University. Very nice having you in the panel. So if you would like to share with us your opening introductory speech. Thank you. Just another announcement, because I need to clarify why we need the mics. We have an interpretation that's going on in English and French. Let me also greet all the participants that are online, and use this particular opportunity to say that if you would like to ask questions, you can do that on slido.com, #CohesionForum, and we are waiting for a question. Please not hesitate that. So now that we know why we need the mics, please, without further ado, you have the floor.
Yes, now once again, thank you very much, Dragos. Good afternoon, everybody. Happy to be here. I mean, first, of course, I wanted to take, of course, our angle to cohesion policy and the social model. I mean, first, let me say that for us, labor market participation is crucial for cohesion in society overall. And having a close look at this very often, driven by many factors, of course, also skills shortages, we see that we have a pretty high inactivity rate of people in the working age in a couple of countries. So there's Croatia, Romania as well, Greece and Belgium, which basically have 30% of the working age population inactive. So this, of course, is one point I wanted to put the spotlight on. Because I think it's very important for many of the points we are talking about to raise the employment rates, because otherwise we will not solve many of the issues we have. And one instrument we think is well placed here is in-work benefits. And Luca and I, we just come from a meeting with Commissioners Johansson and Schmidt, talking about how we can integrate refugees coming from Ukraine, and of course this is very important, that we don't only give shelter to people, but that we also provide them after housing and protection, of course, with some kind of normality, and integrate them in the labor market. But of course, and we also discussed this, it's will not always be totally easy, because many people who will be coming might not have the skills expected in the markets, might not speak the language. There will be many companies who will employ people whatever it takes, but of course you cannot expect this from everybody. So one point we made there, and I wanted to make here, is there's best practices in some countries. For instance, in Sweden, they have these entry agreements where they basically agree for some refugees to employ them. I mean, not to employ them, but to have companies paying a lower salary, and to have governments paying a top up. And this, of course, can be a possibility to bridge this gap. And it can also be important, I mean, to keep the social protection systems function, because we see in many markets now, with the people leaving, especially in Eastern Europe, that of course this will also cause problems there. We also think that the minimum income schemes which are discussed now can be designed as a transitional support towards employment, and we think this is important to do. We also think it's crucial that we adapt our social protection system to the demographic change, and in order to keep them functioning. On cohesion, more specifically, of course, I mean, the cohesion funds, the ESF Plus, and everything, they play a crucial role. I mean, for us, it's very important that there's a clear link to structural reforms, and we will issue our reform barometer next week, and we always have a look on in how far members think that country-specific recommendations are implemented in a satisfactory way. And we, over the years, have an average of 20%, which is quite low. 2 years ago, in the last edition, we had 13%, now at 34%, so this is positive. And this suggests, of course, that there is some value in the conditionality when it comes to the link in the RRF. One point I wanted to make, linked to, of course, cohesion, but to what is happening on the ground, is it's very important that that we continue with capacity building as far as social partners is concerned. So Luca and I, we have done a lot on this together. There's a couple of countries where this is still necessary, sometimes on employers level, sometimes on employees level. And this is crucial, because we need functioning social partners on both sides in all markets, because otherwise they cannot play their full role in bringing all the policies we are talking to fruiten, and especially when bringing cohesion-related programs to fruiten. And we very much welcome that going forward now in the ESF Plus program, countries which are concerned by specific country-specific recommendation, there is now the provision that at least 0.25% of the ESF Plus resources need to be used for capacity building. For the time being, this concerns Hungary, Poland, and Romania. But of course, I mean, we'll also need to make sure that also other countries get a fair share here. To conclude, I mean, having talked about Ukraine at the beginning, of course, now with the flows of refugees coming in, it's very important, as I said, that we help them to find their place in the labor market, and as I said, it's very important to make sure that we have social partners on the ground, because in the countries where this is functioning, I mean, say Poland, we see that, I mean, they organize themselves. I mean, they're at the border to help. I mean, they work with each other to provide for housing, labor market integration, and so on. And I think this is key. I'll stop here. Thank you, Dragos, and back to you.
Thank you so much. This was a really, really good introduction. And we have this dimension of the fact that, if we look to the entrepreneurs, to the businesses, and to the economic approach, where if you would like to have an optimal allocation of resources, then you need to increase participation and you need to stimulate, skilling and upskilling, and so this works together. Now, it's very good that we have a balancing here, because if we have heard right now, the employer's voice and this economic perspective on how the social cohesion components should develop. Now we move to the next speaker, the next distinguished speaker, Luca Vicentini. He was re-elected for a second term as ETUC General Secretary at the 14th Congress in Vienna in 2019. Having already served 4 years as General Secretary, and before that 4 years as ETUC Confederal Secretary. As General Secretary, Luca is responsible for guiding and coordinating ETUC policy, includes high-level meetings with EU, national leaders, institutions, and social partner organizations, representing the Confederation in international and European fora and affiliates initiatives. We've met several times so far. I just want to add that Luca has taken part in the negotiation at EU level on exactly what I mentioned before, the European Pillar of Social Rights, the future of Europe, relaunching European social dialogue, public investment, economic governance, and many, many other issues of importance to European workers. You have been active in trade movements since 1989, which is really amazing. And you've been in ETUC since 1997. Amazing track record. Glad to have you here, Luca. Without further ado, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Dragos. And Iria, it's really a pleasure to be here, also because the topic we are going to analyze is very crucial. It was crucial also in the past, but it becomes more and more important in the current circumstances. We are moving from a crisis to the other, and so having some kind of safety net through the cohesion policy is really important for our European Union and the different countries. Well, first of all, let me say that from a trade union perspective, we really think that the cohesion policy is one of the fundamental pillars of social justice for the European Union. And also, I will say, for upward convergence. That should be one of the fundamental aim of the social market economy and the single market that are the core, let's say, of our European Union. In this respect, the cohesion policy over the years has achieved a very important objectives and targets, I will say, because it has, let's say, paved the paths in many countries to offer proper and decent economic and jobs opportunities to more and more people in the different member states, but also has helped to reduce the gaps and the inequalities that existed and partially, unfortunately, still exist in the labor markets and in the society. The problem is that, of course, the cohesion policy has an important positive impact where it can intervene. There are areas of the social field, of the social economic model of the European Union where, unfortunately, the European Union has very limited competences. And if you look, for instance, at the wage dynamics or at the level of coordination of social protection systems, unfortunately, the effect of the cohesion policy has been very poor because the competences of the European Union are very limited. So we should, in the moment when we evaluate and assess the developments that we had in the field of the cohesion policy of the EU, we should evaluate if we don't have probably to redesign a bit the competences, probably in some fields to give more space to the European Union to improve the coordination, to really push for upward wage convergence and social protection convergence, but at the same time also, if maybe is not the case, in the framework of the Conference on the Future of Europe, to think that on some matters, moving from unanimity to qualified majority will be very important. Having said that, there are, of course, positive and negative elements also in the way the actual cohesion policy has been implemented. I see in a picture that is in general a big success. Maybe two elements I would like to emphasize that are a bit problematic. One is that in the interaction between the different levels of the public administrations, so European Union, national governments and local and regional administrations, sometimes there are loopholes. Problems in terms of coordination, problems in terms of focusing, sometimes it's too much centralized, in other cases it's too much fragmented. So there is a need probably to reflect on how these gaps can be filled to some extent. And the other problem, this is really linked to the role of the social partners, is that while at the European level, particularly in the framework of the ESF, but also more in general in the cohesion policy, we have a fantastic level of participation and partnership between the European Commission and the European level social partners. This is unfortunately not always the case in each and every country. So there is still a great room for improvement to make sure that our colleagues, Marcos and my colleagues on the ground in the different member states, in the regions, can be involved more effectively in implementing the cohesion policy. Then, of course, this is the ordinary picture of the situation. But now, as I said at the beginning, we are going from a crisis to the other. We had COVID, and fortunately, fantastic emergency measures put in place very quickly by the European Union. The cohesion policy can help, and help very significantly, I will say, but it can help even more in the moment when we are going to implement the national recovery and resilience plans in the framework of Next Generation EU. This is linked to the Green Deal, to the Fit for 55, to the two big challenges that we have in front of us, climate and digital transformation. All these transformations, these great changes, will really put, let's say, under pressure our labor markets, our social protection systems, our economic strategy and industrial strategies. So it's important, of course, to have a proper governance in place, to use the money properly, especially the extraordinary one that we have at our disposal, making sure that everybody's involved. But it's also important to see how the cohesion policy can complement and fill the gaps that can exist in the way we are going to implement these extraordinary investment policies, making sure that everybody can really be involved. That, as we always say, nobody's left behind. But you know, repeating this slogan is important, but we have to make sure that this slogan becomes reality. Then this means that we need to create economic and jobs opportunities in the very same local communities where jobs and economic activities are going inevitably to be disrupted by climate transition and by digital transition. It's not enough to tell the people that live in a certain region, in a certain community, you know, guys, don't worry, because there will be 1,000 jobs created, let's say 1,000 kilometers far from you, and you have just to go into a transition. You will have some kind of training and sometimes some kind of social protection, but you have moved out of your community. Well, this is not a good perspective and doesn't go in the direction where the cohesion policy should go. On the contrary. So it's very important that we really focus on the communities, that we create opportunities in the communities for people to be reassured that if a certain economic activity is going to disappear, if certain number of jobs are going to disappear, we will have the possibility to create alternatives in their job offers, economic possibilities, investment in a way that these communities can be saved and can be really protected towards the future. Then finally, of course, I don't mention the war and the refugees because what Marcos just said, I totally agree, and we have also shared a lot of common actions in this respect for the integration of refugees, etc., social partners. I would like to conclude just to mention this extraordinary tool that you have in our hands, that is the European Pillar of Social Rights. Now an action plan, very ambitious, that we have agreed upon in Porto in the Social Summit. 3 targets that are very, very important regarding employment, equality, poverty, how to get out of poverty, of course, and also skills and education paths for everybody. Well, now the challenge is how to implement the national plans to achieve these targets and how the cohesion policy, again, can really serve this objective, how the cohesion policy can help in delivering these targets that have been put at the core of the European Pillar of Social Rights, being coordinated with also the semester that should be also a very powerful tool that should concur to the same objective. So we have great possibilities, in my opinion. There are still gaps, of course, and loopholes, but we can do a lot if we use our tools, including the cohesion policy, in a proactive and positive manner. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luca. The third distinguished speaker of this panel is from Ireland, Alva Finn. She's a passionate leader and change maker with over 10 years of experience in human rights, development and social policy at the EU, UN and national levels. Prior to joining Social Platform, where she is representing right now, Alva worked for Save the Children, Mental Health Europe and the Irish mission to the UN. She also has field experience of working with refugees and asylum seekers in Egypt. You can certainly follow her. She's very active on Twitter. I would certainly say that she's a great addition to this panel, given her grassroots experience and the network that she's representing. So without further ado, Alva, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. And we're really happy to be here. I asked our staff whether or not we'd been invited to the Cohesion Forum in the past. And I think we couldn't remember the last time we were. And that's a surprise. And I think you've all spoken very eloquently about social dialogue and the importance of social dialogue. And I want to speak a little bit about the importance of civil dialogue because sometimes we're missing. And Social Platform, for those of you who might not know us, because maybe we're new to this venue, we are the largest civil society network working on social justice issues at EU level. And we really have strength in numbers, but also in people, because with our members, we represent the full diversity of people in Europe, people who are in and or not in work, men, women, older, younger, children, people with disabilities, people who care for people with disabilities, service providers, you name it, they're in our membership, and we're all working towards a social Europe. And I couldn't be prouder at the moment to be the head of an organization like Social Platform, because now our members are responding rapidly, sometimes more rapidly than member states, to the situation on the ground in response to Ukraine. I'll talk a little bit about that later, but I think it shows why civil society is so important to democracy, to service provision, to filling the gaps, to making a social Europe, to welcoming the new arrivals on our doorsteps. So yeah, we really hope that we'll be invited more often to this venue. And that's because we know that cohesion policy is a key driver of social progress and innovation. And the social pillar really is something that we were calling for many years, to have this compass that is leading us towards a more decent life for all Europeans. And that's the way we're talking about it now. The social pillar is the compass for a decent life for all. And we see that cohesion funds like ESF+, ESF, ERDF are really key for improving employment opportunities, improving social cohesion, but also social fairness in really key services. So healthcare, housing, education, social inclusion, building skills, you name it, it can help if it's responding in the right way and to the right target groups. And we really see it as a precious resource that can make a big difference and make sure that everybody can live these decent lives. And I think from the social pillar point of view, there are some aspects of the social pillar where we need to move forward more. For example, if you just take the parts on housing, you know, we have the homelessness platform. How is cohesion policy going to help with that? And also we have housing crises, which are only going to be made worse by the fact that we have millions of people coming to us. So I think we really need to see more movement on housing going forward, and cohesion policy is one of the drivers of that, and also building more sustainable housing going forward. Some of our members are now looking at vacant housing for incoming refugees and migrants, but are they quality houses? Are they cold? You know, these are the kind of things I think that cohesion policy could really help with. I also reached out to our membership as we were asked to come here for some good examples of how cohesion funds have changed people's lives. So I just wanted to give 2 examples. There's the Lino Spittery Foundation for Inclusive Employment. That's an ESF investment, and it's a public social partnership that focuses on social inclusion for people with disabilities through employment and education. And an ESIF funds that are used for centres in Romania, and these centres help people with intellectual disabilities to build the skills and the tools that they'll need to live independently. And our member, the European Disability Forum, really found that a very promising, empowering and inspiring practice that couldn't have been really made possible without cohesion funds. But it would be remiss of me to not mention that sometimes the funds aren't used in the right way. And as I said, they're very precious funds, so we really don't want them to be misused, and we don't want them to be used in an ineffective way. So I'll just share 1 or 2 examples of where that's happened in the past. So our member, the Ergo Network, shared with us some case studies from Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary and Slovakia, where some funds had been used for Roma inclusion, but they didn't result in any improvement to these people's lives. And one example that really stuck out for me was a block of ghettos where Roma people were living, and they were being renovated for them, but they didn't have proper employment contracts, so they had to leave while the renovation was going on. And then another example, I used to work in deinstitutionalization of mental health institutions, and many of our members work in the expert group on the transition to community-based care, and they raised the alarm last year that cohesion funds were going to be used to build a large-scale mental health institution with 100 residents. This isn't a rights-based approach, and it really shouldn't be happening now. We should have the things in place to stop that. And the solution is simple. You ask the people, you ask the target group, you ask civil society, what are the needs? And I know, it's, and I've also been on the other side of working with a member state, that sometimes you think, oh, we have to ask civil society and that's going to take ages. But actually what it does is it avoids these things, and it creates value, it creates buy-in from people, and it creates perception that this is what they want and this is what they need. And if we don't listen to them, what we end up doing is misusing this precious resource. So that's the partnership principle is great, and the code of conduct is great, but then when you go into the national level and no one's being asked, and this isn't being enforced, then this is where we get these problems. So I really hope that will be fixed in the next programming cycle, because it really just makes a huge difference to people if they're asked what they want. And we're really happy as well that we're able to build a new relationship with Commissioner Ferreira, and that DG Regio are going to take forward capacity building, and we talked about that for social partners as well, capacity building to be able to really engage with this process, because sometimes it just fires ahead without anybody really knowing about it and how to engage and input. And if we want to co-create these programs with civil society, we have to have the capacity to do so. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the need for sometimes changing priorities or shifting the way that we do things in light of COVID. I think COVID really showed us once and for all that we have to balance social, economic and employment priorities together. And we need to design healthy social systems that are able to respond to the crises that we are now facing, but also the transformations, the green and digital transformations. So cohesion policy should have an inbuilt flexibility to transfer resources where they need to go, reorientate services and social infrastructure in light of an ever-changing world. And this means being able to change plans, of course. So for us, I think social impact assessments are really important, and they should sit alongside sustainability assessments, because sometimes, you know, they're kind of done a little bit separately. What we'd really like to see is basically that when you're thinking about what's sustainable, you also think of what's social, because if it's not social, it's not going to be sustainable. That's what we mean by just transition. We need to have people buy into the green transition, and that's what a green just transition really is. So yeah, if you build a service for the average person now, you will always leave someone behind. Because new challenges will come up, and we know that services that are built for the average person often leave people out. So I think, yeah, marrying green and social infrastructure investment will be really important. And we often hear about the cost for industry of making the transition to a more digital and a carbon neutral economy. But we don't know what the price is for the social sector. We just don't know. And it's going to be huge, of course, because there is infrastructure that needs to be built. They're running fleets of cars and any types of transport for people with disabilities. All of these kind of things. We need to know the price of that, and cohesion funds will be really important to filling that financing gap for the social sector, who often have very limited resources. So that's something that we'd like to take forward. And then the last thing I want to say is about Ukraine being the classic example of needing to respond to change. And we really welcome the news around this new use of funds through the Cohesion's Action for Refugees in Europe, using REACT-EU funds, ESF, ERDF. That's great. But member states also need to talk about how EU funds are going to be used in a way that allows those fleeing to access, and without discrimination as well, because that's what we're hearing a lot of. There's people being discriminated against at borders. Some people are saying it's fake news. It's not fake news. We have reports from our members of Roma people, African people who are living in Ukraine being blocked at borders and not being treated the same way as Ukrainians. So yeah, I think we need to make sure that we're applying the same rules to everybody fleeing this conflict, and giving access to EU resources where they are. But we also don't want to create competition for scarce resources. And I mean, I've worked with refugees across the world, and you see it everywhere. When you start having a separate line for people who look differently to you and for the rest of the population, that is when tension starts to build. So we also need to have mainstream services being accessible to refugees, because otherwise it will create tension. And this could go on for many, many years. And right now we're seeing people being very welcoming, but that can change in a heartbeat. And also we don't want to see segregated lines between Ukrainians and other types of refugees. So yeah, that will be important. We don't want segregated communities. We want integrated communities, and if they're going to be with us for a long time, we want them to be part of Europe. And then the last thing that I'll say is, many of our members are using their own scarce resources. They're doing their own fundraising, crowdfunding, fundraising through individual donations, and they're finding it very difficult to access EU funds and also member state funds in these first weeks. So it's great that these will be applied retrospectively. I hope that they'll be able to fill their coffers back up to be able to do the work that they are already doing with vulnerable communities. But this is something that we need to look into in future programming cycles. How can we respond really rapidly to these kinds of situations? Thank you. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Alva. I can relate to what you mentioned as a not so good example of projects related to Roma inclusion. The European Parliament in the Employment and Social Affairs Committee had a visit to Roma settlements in Slovakia, and then an initiative that may translate into a resolution related to the fact that these type of communities, despite of the cohesion policy, are not necessarily emerging or improving their life conditions. So it's good that we can make awareness of that. But what I think is really amazing, and this is the benefit of having three extraordinary speakers in the panel, is that we have a lot of recommendations for the cohesion policy already in place, and I hope that our fine colleagues from DG Grow, DG Employment, and Commission, generally speaking, are here, because I just want to. I've done I circle a couple of words. So we have here the importance of demographic change and the way cohesion policy takes that into account. The issue of structural reforms and conditionality and the governance of the semester that are really important, and and I think that is a consensus for all the speakers, capacity building, and we've heard that. Then we've heard about the importance of competencies and governance again from Luca, the convergence and coordination effect, and the fact that we need to have investments, and very important point, targeted geographically at community level, so that we will have subsidiarity, having its effect by consultation at local level. And then again, Alva mentioned a lot of things that are, I think, amazing recommendations, including the issues related to partnerships, capacity building, again, shifting priorities and the flexibility, and we are going to talk about it. And the idea of investment in social infrastructure is really very important. So already at this particular point of the discussion, we have a lot of food for thought. But let's try to delve a little bit into them. And I will start with the first question. So it's clear from all of you that cohesion policy is important. But if you are to consider one important thing that you will suggest as the major change that you will do or improvement, what that thing will be? And you have hinted and suggested quite a lot of things, but if you will select one important thing that it will be important based on the angle or representation that you have, what that will be. And I will start in a reversed order. I will go to Alva. So out of all the things, what is the most important thing that you think we should shift gears in the cohesion policy? Please.
Yeah, I think it has. Is this working? Yes. Yeah, I think that cohesion funds can really help with coverage for quality services. I mean, across the social pillar, we're seeing some progress on minimum wages, for example, this year with the minimum wage directive, hopefully something coming along with minimum income. But the solution to giving everybody a decent life is also to have empowering services alongside that. And we've seen with COVID just how decimated our services are, not just at public level, but also at not-for-profit service provider level. That's who is in our membership, actually. So we know you can't have public, private, and not-for-profit, kind of separately. They all have to be working in one kind of system, and they all need to be supported in different ways, because we know that when a crisis happens, like what's happening in Ukraine, like what happened with COVID, it is often not-for-profit social service providers who come in to fill gaps, and they fill gaps for very vulnerable people often. Yeah, I think cohesion funds can really build out the full social system, the full host of empowering services out to everybody, because I think that's something that we really see. Each different country in the EU has a different problem. In my own country, in Ireland, we have a massive problem with healthcare. People wait for months and months and months, and we're a very developed country with people who are taking in high wages, but that still we see, even though that's happening, and they're taxed quite heavily, that the healthcare system is not providing coverage for everyone, and it's not of the same quality as, for example, in Belgium. So yeah, these are kind of another opportunity would also be to start building out care. This idea of the care strategy. We have the child guarantee, which really focuses on childcare, early childhood education, services for children. But those services don't just help children. They help women who need to go into the labor market. They help build a more inclusive labor market. They help people in the long run. They help families. But it isn't only just in childcare, because I know that from reviewing a lot of the recovery and resilience plans, some countries are really investing heavily in childcare, which is great. But actually, we all need care at some point in our lives. And at the moment, we don't have quality, affordable care across the life cycle. So that's another thing that I think, in terms of service provision, could really be built up through the cohesion funds over the next few years.
Thank you. So quality services and social services as being the focal point for improvement and change. I'm going to go to Luca. The most important thing in shifting for the future cohesion policy.
Since Alva is right, emphasizing that we have a huge diversity between member states and also between communities, I think that the most important thing to make sure that cohesion policy can work is, first of all, to listen to people and communities and understand what are the different problems and the different gaps that have to be filled, and then to target the way we are spending the money. But you know, for doing this, partnership is fundamental. So I think that building a real capacity for social partners, civil society organizations, and all the other actors that are involved to be very active, and having a real attitude from the different local communities and the different levels of the institutions to listen to the social partners, to the civil society organizations, etc. This is partnership, and this means that you are then empowering the cohesion policy to really be targeted to the real needs of people, because our members that are operating on the ground, they know the best how the situation really is and what has to be done. In some cases, it's about spending money to top up the capacity of the local authorities or the social and public services. In other cases, it's about filling the gaps of legislation. I was looking at the question, for instance, on the screen here. No? There is a participant that was asking, what can we do to help workers in the digital economy to enjoy the same labor rights and collective agreements as the others? Well, it's a mix, of course. It's about legislation. The European Union has just presented an important proposal for a directive on platform work, but it's also about empowering the social partners, for instance, in delivering proper collective agreements that can really help the people. So, I mean, it should be a mix, but to get the right mix and to target it properly, local authorities, the European Commission, the governments have to listen to the actors on the ground, and this means partnership. As I said before, is very well implemented at the European level, but there are too many countries, too many regions and communities where, unfortunately, partnership and social dialogue, civil dialogue as well, are not implemented enough. So we really need to invest more and more on this, I think.
Thank you very much. And then I am moving to Marcus. What is the most important thing that you would like to see changing in the cohesion policy?
I might raise 3 points, but before this, let me start by saying, and something I think about since a while is, we clearly see, and of course this is the very core of cohesion policy, how important the regions are, because we also see it now in the refugee crisis. Because I mean, it's actually what is happening is we are as good the structures on the ground are. So therefore the regions are very important. I mean, not something I deal with it heavily normally, but when you come across it, I mean, you really very much realize this. So this for a start. Otherwise, I mean, I agree with Luca. I mean, back to capacity building, because I mean, we need the social partners on the ground. And we know that it's not functioning everywhere, and it's something we try to raise since a while, and because this is important in a situation like now, when we need to welcome the refugees and to help them. This is important when we need the social partners to play their role in the semester process, and it's also important when we need the social partners to play the role in the cohesion policy. So all this is very important. My main point is labor market participation. Of course, I mean, you deal with it a lot in your committee, but I think this is the key to many aspects, and I think this is something where we would need to have a look, I mean, in how far cohesion policy can be helpful there. And if you allow me one point, I mean, you raised the point of we must not distinguish between refugees, very, very true. I mean, we just also discussed this. I think the problem of, let's say, the distinction between, because, I mean, the legal situation is very clear. I mean, everybody who is a legal resident in Ukraine needs to be treated the same. They all have full rights, and this is very important. From what we heard and what we just heard, the problem is diminishing, because these people left the country first, and most of them are out now. I mean, those who are now coming is mostly Ukrainians who stayed in the first time and unfortunately are still pushed out of the country by the war getting worse. But in principle, of course, you are totally right, and this is very clear. And also has a link to something which is very close to my heart, which means attracting highly skilled people in Europe. And we discussed this as well in this meeting, and this is something where we do less good than other parts of the world, because those who can choose, they are not coming to places where they might fear that they might be discriminated, and then therefore it is important to have a close look at it.
Thank you very much. Now, it's clear that this is not a time where we can just talk about the future of the cohesion policy without talking about the present and what we are facing today. And you've already mentioned the topic of Ukraine. I was not mentioning it because I had a particular question I wanted to address to you. So we are right now in a framework where the proposal of the Commission that it's going to help a lot with financing the integration of refugees is called a Cohesion Action for Refugees in Europe, CARE, the acronym. And the question is, together with the way in which we can flexibly use the resources of REACT and the 2021, 2027 resources. The question is, I mean, and you've addressed the idea that we should not have different status and so on, but the question is are these measures enough? Are these measures enough to show that we can apply the values in the Union related to solidarity and cohesion to the refugees? Are these reforms and proposals enough on the short run, on the medium run? So if we can comment a little bit on the situation in Ukraine and the measures that have been proposed. I'm going to start from you again, Marcus. What would be your assessment of these measures, and how do you see the larger picture of cohesion in the view of the humanitarian and socio-economic crisis that it's right now triggered by Russia's aggression in Ukraine?
Well, I mean, I think we are all aware that this is a dimension we have never seen. I mean, when we talk about refugee crisis we have seen before, I mean, be it Syria or Afghanistan or further back, the Yugoslavian war or the post-Yugoslavian division war, I mean, we have basically reached the figures within the first couple of days. So we have here the latest figures. So I think Poland alone has already received 1.9 million refugees. So this is of course skyrocketing. I think what it was very important that the action was taken rapidly. First on the side to make clear that the people coming in a very exceptional situation have full rights. So meaning that they have right to shelter, they have right to access to health care, social protection, and that they should be given the possibility to access the labor market. So this is very important. I mean, the money issue you were raising, and care, of course, being the key. I mean, of course, this is a lot about using funds that are there, and I think on this we all agree. It's very important that the flexibility is there, that the funds can be used where they are necessary. And I think this will be enough for the next maybe 2 to 4, 2 to 5 months, whatever. I mean, this is a guesstimate. And I think in the first step, this is very important that this was done rapidly. What comes then? Very difficult to say. I mean, I have always been known more as a budget disciplinist. Luca and I, we had a chat with the president 3 days after the invasion. I'm not categorically opposed to anything in this case. Of course, this is for the member states. I mean, the famous debate on the headroom, Article 122, and so on and so on. I mean, I agree with those who say we should use what we have. So I mean, care is part of it. Using what can be mobilized and is still there in the RIF and so on, and there's also other possibilities where you can reallocate funds, and I think this is very important. But of course we don't know what the future will bring, and if this war is getting worse, and if this lasts long, we will need to think on how to deal with it, because of course the danger is there that I mean, and you said it, I mean, now everybody is very welcoming. Of course, we must not underestimate that I mean, people at some stage might also feel overwhelmed. And then, of course, I mean, the European cohesion will need to prove that it's functioning. And then we will need to think about how to also finance this.
Thank you very much. I will go back to Luca. What would be your assessment of the current package and the way in which, through cohesion, we can manage this particular shock and crisis?
Well, I think that to reply to your question, we should check what measures are put in place against 3 or 4 big needs that we are facing at the moment. The first one is if we have put in place all the tools that can really ensure that everybody that wants to flee from the war can really do it in total safety and can reach the European Union territory. And it's true what Marcus was saying, that, let's say, legally speaking, the fact that the Temporary Protection Directive was activated, first time ever, after 20 years it was decided upon, legally speaking, gives this possibility to everybody that really wants to leave Ukraine because of the war. But then it's also true that, okay, Commissioner Johansson told us today that a few hours ago they have adopted the guidelines, I mean, to implement properly the Temporary Protection Directive. But on the ground, in terms of implementation, there are still some problems. Because it's true that, legally speaking, everybody can come, but then there are elements of discrimination that are going on the borders. And these problems still exist, without mentioning the problem of those refugees or migrants or whatever you want to call them that either are undocumented, but where they were in Ukraine and they need to leave the country, or those that are stuck since 1 year on at the border of Belarus because of the famous misuse of migrants that Mr. Lukashenko did a few months ago. So, I mean, we need to look at the picture with a certain attention to make sure that the proper implementation takes place and there are no elements of practical discrimination in this respect. The second problem is about welcoming in the short term, in terms of urgency, these people, accommodating them, providing housing or in any case shelter, and also making sure that they can, let's say, be welcome in the society. That means that since these refugees, 3 million more or less now, that reach the European territory, first of all, don't want to be refugees. They are not going to apply for asylum. They are going to stay for the time that is necessary, and then as soon as possible they want to come back. And this is an element to be considered, because if you are not applying for asylum, then you are in a different status, so we have to see how really to help them. Second problem, they are 90% women and children. Elements of trafficking, harassment, sexual aggression, etc. are happening already now. We have absolutely to avoid that all this is going on. And we have the problem of welcoming children. That welcoming children means, first of all, that you have to allow these children to continue going to school. And there is an incredible language barrier. These people speak mainly only Ukrainian and Russian. If they speak Russian, they are discriminated immediately, because Russia is the enemy at the moment, even if these people are actually the victims of this war. But then there is the problem that how do you put in place a proper education system in the immediate need, I mean, to make sure that these children can continue their education paths. So, and then some kind of social protection measures, etc. So there are huge problems in this respect. Not all the countries are ready to cope with this. And by the way, particularly the countries that are facing the major influx of migrants and refugees on their territories, because they are just on the border, in many of these countries, well, the social protection and education systems are not exactly resilient to cope with an emergency like this. 3 million people in few weeks coming to their territory. So there are funds available, as you rightly pointed out, but we have to see exactly what has to be done to help the different governments and member states in those communities to make sure that these services are provided properly. The third element is that maybe not immediately, but in the medium term, we need to offer a job opportunity to these people. They cannot live forever just under public assistance. They need to find an opportunity, I mean, to have a job, to be included in the labor market. And again, we have an enormous issue here, because we have seen hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian men that have left the European Union to go back to Ukraine to fight, to defend their country against the invasion. And so they have impoverished. There was an incredible brain drain in our labor markets because these people were here working, and now they are out. And on the contrary, all the women and the children that came, well, they are not able to replace the men that left in the same very jobs. So we need to find new jobs for those that are coming and fill the gaps that those that have left in our country. So this is a real challenge for our labor markets. We will have to see how to manage it. The social partners, of course, are ready to bring a contribution, but it's not an easy task. And finally, and by the way, when we are going to do all this, we have also to be very careful that there are no bad behaviors going on in terms of labor exploitation and cheap labor and social and wage dumping, etc., etc. So these elements imply also an important empowerment of inspections, and regulations and controls in a way that we make sure that these people are treated equally and fairly in the labor market when they will get a job. And final element, the fourth check we should put in place is that this war, particularly the sanctions that are absolutely necessary, of course, will have a terrible impact on our economy. Entire economic activities will be stopped de facto, and the jobs that are in those activities will disappear. So we are going to face in few weeks, probably in few months, without mentioning then the energy prices and all the crisis that is linked to that is due, by the way, mainly to speculation, not to the war. But anyway, to make it short, these economic effects and effects on jobs are going to happen very soon. So we have, on the one side, to spend a lot of money and efforts to welcome the people that are coming, but we need at the same time also to help the European citizens, workers, businesses, to cope with the effects of this war and the sanctions. And in this respect, I think that we really need to make an effort that should be very similar to the one that we made all together as the European Union in the summer 2020, when these extraordinary emergency measures were decided upon in few weeks. We should do something similar now, because otherwise, really, we will be facing an horrible situation also for our labor markets and for our economic activity. So, not an easy picture, but we have to be very cold-minded and very focused on how to react.
Thank you very much, Luca. It's funny that when you said three and I was counting the fourth and the fifth, then you're mentioning them as well. Indeed, it will have a big impact on all the citizens, energy poverty included, and thank you very much for this comprehensive view. I know that you want to have a follow-up. Do you want to make it right now, please, Marcus, and then Alva, please. So, Marcus.
No, go ahead.
If it's just a quick follow-up.
No, it's a quick follow-up. Underlining 3 points Luca has mentioned. First, it is very clear that this will be a big labor market challenge for a couple of our markets. Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, probably Romania. Poland alone, I think we talk about 50,000 people. So this will be a big challenge, for the functioning of the labor markets there. For tragic reasons, but of course there's also this labor market story. I agree with Luca on the abuse. It's very, incredible certain things you hear. It's not even abuse. This is things which are criminal, but of course, therefore, there needs to be clearly surveillance. At the same time, we also need to think about, let's say, innovative solutions like the Swedish example I mentioned at the beginning, because as I say, there will be many people coming which will be difficult to employ, and I totally understand Luca's message on the pay and on the minimum pay and on the equal pay, but you might need instruments to bridge this, with all the readiness of companies. But the most important point I wanted to make is to underline the sanctions point. I didn't mention it in the first time because we talk about this all the time. We've made clear very rapidly that we stand behind all the sanctions that are necessary, and I think there's a very high extent of unity here. But at the same time, the economic impacts will be dramatic. And I don't talk about the market shares and things. I mean, this is still, let's say, heavy for some companies or some sectors, but it's digestible. I talk about, I mean, all the second, third, and fourth round effects. We don't even know by now how they will all cross-disseminate. I mean, the non-availability of raw materials, the energy costs, obviously, the disruption supply chains, on top of disruptions we had on the COVID, the disruption due to transport disruptions. And all these things will build up in becoming very difficult situations, and we might also go to recession due to these things. I mean, even so, for the time being, I'm not saying it too loud because we need to see. But I mean, this is a very difficult situation. And the last point, of course, we raise with the Commission is we will need to scale up the guidance, because companies are faced with a new avalanche of sanctions every second day. Some of them very difficult to apply. I mean, give you an example, these luxury good things, threshold 300 euros. I mean, this is fine if you read it in the newspaper, but I mean, how you apply this in a daily life, I mean, this is very difficult. But this is just a small example. And this means we'll need to scale up the guidance in order to make sure that, of course, we do what is necessary to increase the pressure on the Russian regime, but also to make sure that we do not multiply the negative economic consequences because there's not enough guidance.
Thank you very much for that. Indeed, in the European Parliament, you already had an exchange with Commissioners Dombrovskis, Vice President Dombrovskis, Executive Vice President Dombrovskis, and Commissioner Gentiloni. And we are planning to have an exchange of views, a hearing with the European Central Bank and the EIB as part of the Econ Committee. So I'm talking with the Economic and Monetary Affairs head right now. So indeed, scenarios are important. Right now, we were told to, stay cool, but I think that many of the things cannot be anticipated, actually. Let me go to Alva right now. Alva, I mean, your view is quintessential. The first response in the situation of Ukraine was not given by central authorities or the union, was given by NGOs, volunteers, local authorities, people in the first line that have provided, an amazing act of solidarity that I think it's really at the core of cohesion. So we cannot talk about cohesion without this feeling of solidarity. So how you would describe what happened and what are the needs and how you would assess the situation right now?
We created a hub actually on our website because we found that they're all responding in different ways to different needs. So we had, for example, ILGA Europe and Transgender EU were telling us about the problems that trans women are having in trying to flee. They're expected to fight. When they do cross the borders, they don't have access to the medicines that they need, which are very specialized. We also heard about the different treatment of Roma people. They were hiring their own buses to get across Europe because they weren't being picked up by state buses. So they were helping to fundraise doing that. Some of them are large-scale service providers who provide services in humanitarian contexts. I think one thing that we're very conscious of is that when you have so many volunteers and so many people who are not used to providing these kind of supports to people, there is always a danger that you'll have a few bad eggs. So safeguarding, which we call it in our sector, is really important. You have to do the checks and balances. You can't just have anybody arriving at a border and responding to what are predominantly, in some places, women and children. That leads to what, like they're saying in the labour market, exploitation, of course, and abuse. So we also, I think it's something that the EU should look into when they're also providing funds, that you require safeguarding measures and safeguarding policies within the NGO sector. So even though they're doing amazing work, it just takes one bad person, and that's why we have to have structural safeguarding protections in the NGO community. And it's something that takes a while to set up, and it also takes resources. I worked at Save the Children, and we had a whole safeguarding team who you could report to, but a lot of NGOs do not have that now. They're not used to responding to this kind of situation. yeah, and I think overall the temporary protection directive, it'll be very interesting to see what the difference it makes to allow immediate access to the labour market. It's a very rare thing actually in a crisis like this, so that'll be interesting to see how it pans out. I think, yeah, at Social Platform we've been calling for proper social safety nets for years. The COVID crisis has made it clear, and many people who have never accessed social protection before are now accessing. And if we head into another recession, we need to make sure that that's there in the background again, that we don't go back to austerity, that we don't have this thing of, well, you can fend for yourself now, we're finished. No, we can't do that. We have to be able to provide people with a basic with the basics, yeah, going forward. So that's something that I think the EU needs to look at overall. You know, it was great to have SURE. What's going to follow from that is important too. And I think solidarity, like love, takes work. It doesn't stick around forever. So that's something that as well that I would underline. For NGOs, it's normal, you know, that's where solidarity is in our blood, in our core. We immediately react. But for the rest of the population, you know, you get fatigue with seeing new faces, with seeing bad things on the news, with the competition for services and things like that. So we need to also be thinking, how are we going to get ahead of that? What's the narrative? Yeah, and as I said, not having separate lines, that kind of thing, access to mainstream services will be really important, so that, yeah, we don't have that competition and that growing tension, because, yeah, I've lived in countries where they have large refugee populations, and you can feel it. You know, one door for them and another door for you. And then, yeah, I think solidarity within member states, because Poland is now in the very unfortunate position that Italy and Greece have been in the past. We can provide for this amount of people. We can. We're a big continent with, you know, one of the most successful development projects of all time. If we share the load, then we can do it. If we leave Poland and Romania and other neighbouring countries to do all of that work, then that's when we will start seeing problems. So yeah, as we've always been calling for in civil society, burden sharing is absolutely crucial. I think because of the visa waiver, that will make it much easier. And I think that, yeah, it's that's one of the good things about the temporary protection directive. But yeah, let's share the load.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I think that's very useful to link the feeling that we have right now in the refugee crisis with the, you know, the backbone of the cohesion policy, because the values should be the same. I mean, it's not different. Now, we received a question, or actually it's a statement that I would like to have your reaction on. It says, during the, Joe Bothmer for EAP in Netherlands, during the pandemic, some workers were seen as key to a functioning society. They deserve to earn a decent income. I think that before the February 24th, one of the discussions here would have been about COVID and the lessons learned from COVID. We are right now focusing on Ukraine because we have... Okay. So again, we have the discussion about COVID, and I want to ask you, what would be the links or the lessons learned from the COVID experience for the cohesion policy that it's most valuable for you? And I've heard you, Alva, talking about the services, and here we have a hint towards the first liners that have provided services in the during the pandemic. But I would very much appreciate from your side to tell me what would be the most important lesson learned, you know, going through the pandemic, and that can be useful for the cohesion policy. So please, Alva.
Sure, I think, yeah, I mean, as I've just described for Ukraine, the same is true for COVID, which is different people were affected differently by the pandemic, and it was an uneven effect depending on your life. You know, some people can't really adapt to working in an online context. I mean, I very much agree with you, Joe from EAPN. Of course, Netherlands EAPN is one of our members, and we're pushing for the minimum wage directive. Because yeah, for us, you can't just call someone an essential worker one day and then go back to just, you know, paying them peanuts. Yeah, so I mean that's a big learning as well. I mean, my partner works in the service industry, and they just can't hire people because people have changed the way they fundamentally think about work. So that's a big learning, you know, and I think it's a big learning for maybe business as well. How will you grapple with that, and the working conditions conversation is also something that's very big. And then yeah, as I said, our big learning was, you know, so many people who probably would have called people, you know, benefit scroungers or whatever, actually benefited from furlough, from other social protection. They see now the value. You know, there is time. There's political energy behind the idea that you need social safety nets that can protect, because it isn't that people don't want to be in employment, right? I think that myth sometimes is maybe. It's been damaged, which we're very happy about. And then yeah, I think the same thing that I said as well, like that you get a fatigue about it. People don't want to hear about it anymore. They just want to move forward, but they want you to learn the lessons. And I think we need to learn the lessons. And I think sometimes the solutions are similar to what we've been kind of parroting for many years as social platform. You know, you need proper income, minimum wages, and services, and everybody needs to be able to access these things and be treated equally. And I mean, those those things have never changed for us, and I think they've only you know, been strengthened by the case of COVID, but also Ukraine, inflation, energy prices. Yeah, sometimes the state has to step in and regulate and provide. Even if, yeah, I think austerity, thankfully, is in the background. And another thing that we're really working on now is more the economics of things. So we're also working on the economic governance review. It'll be interesting to see as well how Ukraine affects that, because if we really are heading into a recession and we need to change the way that we look at our economics and have a well-being approach that allows investments in tough times, even if it doesn't strike with the old wisdom we have. You know, I look at the fact that the Stability and Growth Pact was decided in the late 90s. I mean, we've gone through a lot since then, and our fiscal policy and the type of investment we're doing should be completely different from that time. So yeah, I just hope we learn those lessons.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Alva. Marcus, you have been referred directly in terms of representing businesses. So what would be your take on COVID? I mean, these were some unprecedented measures of solidarity with the SURE program and many other things that would have been unconceivable before. But I mean, how would you see that these responses and the lessons for the cohesion policy?
Well, I mean, maybe first reacting to some of the things I heard. I mean, first I think it was a big boost for digital, and this is positive. And many things which were unthinkable before, I mean, are totally obvious now. I mean, including all age groups and old people. I mean, if you fix, I don't know, a video meeting for tomorrow, and you have people who say they're not able to do well, I mean, they are like analphabets. So this is a big boost. And of course, this is something which, I mean, can help certain regions because, I mean, you spread a bit. So this is important. On the pay, well, I've heard paying peanuts. Well, I think there's no wonders. I mean, there's always it's a bit the market action. Yeah. Of course, we see that. I mean, now, for instance, in let's say I think what you call Horeca here in Belgium. I mean, many restaurants we hear that okay, they don't fire cooks because the people are no longer able to work all night for a certain salary, and many of them move on to work in factories or in companies which provide for solar panels. Well, this is the market as well. I mean, the issue is, of course, I mean, in some cases you will need to pay some people more, but this also means that restaurants become more expensive. And the money is not falling from the sky. I mean, it's then the people who go to the restaurants who pay it. So I mean, I think there's a lot which is regulated by the market. What I also see is that we sometimes have problems getting the people out of short-term work, which is an interesting phenomenon, because we have areas where we really would need the people desperately. And we talk to the labor market services, and they tell us, I mean, the people who are in short term, who meanwhile have found some kind of a new balance, are difficult to get back into full-time working. And if this is the case, we then need to think about, let's say, the incentivizing system, and to make sure that if we need the people, they come back to work. And as much as this is understandable, then we might have a mistake in the incentivizing system. But the real lesson I would draw is that I think we have handled this because we had to handle it, and it can be a chance to learn for the future. The only problem is that, as Luca said earlier, that instead of now hopefully learning and going out of this crisis, we are right into the next crisis, which can even be bigger, and of course this is a challenge.
Thank you very much. Luca, what would be your take on, COVID and the lessons for the cohesion policy?
I will start from the statement that you just read, because this statement shows that one of the lessons, maybe not the only one, but one of the lessons that we have learned from COVID is that COVID has exposed the incredible inequalities that exist in our labor market, in our society, in our economy, and the fact that those professions, those workers that saved us during the outbreak and during the lockdowns, I mean healthcare, public services, transport, food delivery, etc., are among those that are less paid and less protected. And the pandemic has even exacerbated further, I would say, these inequalities, some divergence, and some race to the bottom even in some cases. And now the risk is, as we were commenting before, that this new crisis will worsen the situation even further. So I think the big challenge is how we can use the instruments that we have at our disposal to address these inequalities, to make sure that we can pave the path for sustainable growth for all, where cohesion and inclusion are the fundamental element that we need to implement. In this respect, of course, Next Generation EU and all the elements that are connected to that are fundamental, as is fundamental also the implementation of the European Pillar of Social Rights, and also of the different legislative initiatives that the European Commission has started in the framework of the implementation of the pillar. There are many that have been already implemented, but many others that are ongoing and that we really need to finalize as soon as possible. But then the third element, just to conclude on this, is exactly the cohesion policy. So we have really to make sure that the cohesion policy goes together with Next Generation EU, the massive investment connected to that, the Green Deal, the sustainability that is part of it, the European Pillar of Social Rights, but also a European semester that should be reformed in a way that becomes also a social semester, a semester for equality, where also social and equality elements, convergence and cohesion are considered properly. All these elements have to go together with the cohesion policy. And the cohesion policy, as I said at the really beginning, can really be a fundamental complement to the other instruments that we have at our disposal. Yeah, we are facing crisis after crisis, but I mean, we have a lot of instruments that can allow us to react in the proper manner. We have to use them at the best, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting that you made reference to the RRF. I mean, we didn't have time to discuss here the relation between the RRF and the cohesion policy, but in the Parliament right now, we presented yesterday in the Econ Budget Committees the implementation report 1 year after adoption. and we are thrilled to see that it's the good mix of investment that you've mentioned before and reforms that you also hinted, quite clearly. We have about 2,000 milestones for reforms and 3,000 milestones for investments in the 22 plans that have been adopted. So this is indeed encouraging. Now, I would like to have a final round that will go a little bit into the future, without obviously forgetting about the crisis and the resilience component, but going back to the impetus of the dual transformation, green and digital, and to try to end with this note of how we see the cohesion policy in this particular context. We have the green and digital transformation. Petru Danda from Romania mentioned that the new digital forms of work and so on, and that's the angle that you've covered. But right now, how do you see a more social and inclusive Europe, in the light of the digital and green transformation? And I will start with you, Luca, and then go to Margus, and Alva will have the final word on that. So please, Luca, as brief as possible.
Of course. Well, the digital environment and all the problems that are linked to that have to be addressed mainly through regulation and protection. So I think that in this respect, it's less for the cohesion policy to intervene, while on the contrary, on the climate transformation, the cohesion policy can do a lot exactly for the purpose that I mentioned before. We need to build investment, cohesion, development, job creation in the very same communities where the disruption is going to take place. And you cannot do that without a cohesion policy that is really focused on the territory, on the communities, on the reality that are going to change. And so we need really to improve our capacity of having an effective governance of the cohesion policy through proper partnership. If we do that, we can succeed, I think.
Excellent. And I can assure that the Employment and Social Affairs Committee is trying to balance the ENVI, the Environmental Committee, exactly with this particular perspective, with the Social Climate Fund and so on and so forth. Now, I would like to challenge you, Marcus, or challenge Luca a little bit. He mentioned the green is more important for cohesion than the digital. But we do have the digital skills problem, the digital divide. I mean, how do you see the green and digital transformations affecting the cohesion policy, and how we are going to see cohesion in the future?
No, well, of course you're right on the skills, but of course this would be another hour. Yeah. And we just had a meeting on this as well, but I agree, obviously. But let me focus on the green, because I think it's very important what Luca said, that of course we need to maintain the cohesion, and this happens on the ground, and you also talked about the Social Climate Fund. This is very important. But my main message on the green transformation is we need to get it right in the first time, allowing our economy to stay competitive. Because if we are failing to do so, the money is simply not there to remedy upon the losses in jobs we will have. So we support the green transition, obviously, and we also now see that this will be an important part of the answer. That we need to become more independent from certain sources and so on. At the same time, it's very important that we run a reality check through the whole program to make sure that we also succeeded economically in the new context. So again, it is an important part of the answer, but honestly, looking at one or the other press conference to basically react to every crisis with more of the same, this will not be enough neither. And the last sentence, because I didn't say it before, sorry, I think the best means of cohesion policy, to come back to the overarching topic, is investment. And of course, a lot is coming from the RF now, but this is key. Look at Magdeburg yesterday. The big investment which will happen in Magdeburg, for instance, to bring one example, will be a total game changer for the whole region.
Thank you very much. Alva, please.
Yes, I think I already spoke about the need for the social sector to be supported to do green transition work. Of course, they're also involved in upskilling of lots of different types of people, people who've been out of the labour market for a long time, persons with disabilities. Also the role of social economy enterprises, which I think we can really foster a lot more, because a lot of them have a social ethos, but many of them have a sustainability lens as well. We have some members, for example, who focus on waste management, and they really focus on getting the most vulnerable into the labour market through this type of upskilling. So yeah, I think there's a huge role, and sometimes the things that are digital are also green. So that's another thing. Like, there's so much work that can be done around digitalizing social protection systems, for example, that can also be green. You know, like people traveling back and forth all the time to go and get checks, that kind of stuff. But that's not to say that, for sometimes it still needs to be in person for some types of people in vulnerable situations, you know, people with intellectual disabilities, that kind of thing. But what I would love to see is, as well, is like a proper undertaking of the cost and encouraging social actors to think about it, because we're so far behind. I mean, I think the housing, our housing members are really far ahead. Some people thinking about mobility, but the rest of them just, you know, they're not ready, and people haven't really been investing in them being ready. So I think we're being a bit left behind. And I think cohesion funds could really help with that in the twin transitions, because we're a bit left behind as well on digitalization too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have arrived at the end of this breakout session. I think that what we've heard is that if we look at the definition of the cohesion policy and the current action, some things that need to be reinforced, because cohesion policy is about investment and structural reforms, and it's about, you know, reducing inequality. It's about creating access and opportunity. It is directly linked to the, you know, European Pillar of Social Rights, and also to the Child and Youth Guarantee. So these are things that are clearly embedded. You wanted to have a question? No, about the microphone thing. Yeah. You want to make a statement? Yeah. Okay. So then I just wanted to just mention the fact that the partnership principle is at the core of the cohesion policy, and it was reinforced here by what we said. And if you would actually come closer, I will give you the mic to have this statement, and then we are going to wrap it up. So yeah, please, Alva. Alva is giving you the mic.
Thank
so
you very
please,
much.
if you can introduce yourself.
Yes, for sure. I'm the Deputy Director General of DG Employment. My name is Andriana Sukova, and I want to thank everyone for the very conclusive, very clear messages, and we've learned all of that. So we are taking care of your proposals. I want to make 2 points. Please. One is in really directly to what you said about partnership. We are setting up now for the next Common Provisions Regulation for all funds under the Common Provisions Regulation, which means European Regional Development Fund, Social Fund Plus, the Cohesion Fund, the Just Transition Fund, the Asylum Migration Fund, the Border Management and Visa Instrument, and so on, a common community of practice on partnership. So this will be a next level of our community of practice so far and the code of conduct on partnership, because we really want to have a very broad participation, a very broad discussion of how implementation goes, because let's not forget, cohesion policy is a shared management effort. It's not only the Commission. So Commission is doing its best, it's taking its role, but we cannot do it without the Member States and the managing authorities. And my second point, so the community of practice extended on partnership will be having its first meeting on the 6th of April, so in 10 days. My second point is about, unfortunately, we have to discuss about Ukraine and what is the impact on Europe and border member states at the start. But if things continue like this, inevitably all member states will be affected. So just to let you know that the Commission started preparing all flexibility readjustments of our legislation, as you know, but we're not stopping there. We have established the solidarity platform where twice a week there is exchange with the member states, and also the Commission is setting up a further coordination mechanisms with the member states, first meeting next Monday, to make sure that the national coordination systems have been well established, they work together, and also that whatever is needed, if more needed, we can react. Alva was part of a meeting on Monday afternoon where we discussed what are the impressions, what are direct needs at the borders, because the non-governmental organizations are there and they know best what are the needs at this stage. But this unfortunate situation, we don't know how it will evolve. And inevitably, if things go like this, there will be refugees and Ukrainian citizens all over Europe. So we are working very closely with the authorities for the flexibilization of their programs and using the funds that they have now, but also in the preparation of the 21-27 programs, because these people who have the right to stay have full rights to labor market, to social protection, to social inclusion measures, education, childcare, and so on. So we have to be sure that this is already part of our cohesion policy in the medium term period. Thank you very much, and sorry for jumping in. I was waiting for you to ask some interventions from the floor.
I think that this can count as breaking news, and I appreciate that very much, Deputy Director. I would like to again thank very much Alva, Finn, Luca, Vicentini, and Marcus Bayer, and I would like to thank all of you for participating. Let's congratulate the speakers for their effort and for their contribution. So let's go and give them a round of applause. Thank you very much. And thank you to the European Commission for DG Grow and DG Employment for organizing that. Thank you and have a nice evening.